Call to order the regular meeting of the Dickinson City Commission for December 21st, 2021. Let the record show that all commissioners are present. Commissioner Soboluk is present by video. First item up is the order of business. Mr. Winningham, are there any changes to the order of business?
Good afternoon, Mr. President and Commissioners. There is no change to the agenda or order of business, but however, I would like to highlight one item that we'll review. It's item 8A. It's labeled as condemnation proceedings. The only item that'll be talked about there is just the dates to be set. So nothing of real substance, just the dates for later.
The dates for the hearings?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Winningham on the order of business? Now I look for a motion on the order of business.
Move to approve.
We have a motion to approve by Commissioner Frederick,
Second.
second by Commissioner Walla. Any further discussion on the order of business? All in favor, state aye.
Aye.
Right.
Motion carries. Next item up is the consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda that the commission wishes to discuss? Hearing no concerns, I'd look for a motion on the consent agenda.
I'll move to approve.
Second.
I have a motion to approve by Commissioner Walla, second by Commissioner Oderman. Any further discussion on the consent agenda? Hearing none, we'll vote. Ms. Walla?
Aye.
Mr. Oderman?
Aye.
Mr. Frederick?
Aye.
Mrs. Soboluk?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, motion carries. Our first item up is the Administration and Finance, and we have our 2022 fee schedule. This will be presented by Deputy City Administrator Carlson.
Thank you, President Decker and Commissioners. Before you is the fee schedule for the year 2022 and the resolution that goes along with approving it. And for the public's sake and the Commissioner's sakes, we're going to just go through the items that have changed or been added. So going through the schedule under administration, alcohol and tobacco. The number L, beer and wine only on sale license, that was staff recommendation of putting it at $1,250 for issuance and also the same amount for the renewal. The non-refundable application fee for the licenses went from $250 to $500. Non-refundable transfer fee was $250, went to $500. And then new owner license fee is just a title change. Then down in the business contractor licenses for the arborist, it went from $25 to $100 annually. Then under buildings and code enforcement, it was added the property code compliance. This was always just in buildings and sites, and we put it under the buildings and codes area for the same amount, just so that people would have a reference to go for either one. And that's the weed control and lot mowing. Under the buildings and sites, it was added under property maintenance, the private tree trimming, pruning, shrub removal, went to the same pricing of $500 per hour with $500 minimum, or the total bill if higher. That is a new one that's been added. Then on down to museum, there was still images, reproduction fees, and that was for business and individuals. And there was pricing, and then pricing was added for nonprofits other than museums, and it was a lower cost for those items per image. So that was added new. Under police, body cam and traffic requests, now that is new for us. That has been put out as hourly rates on those redactions and videos. Solid waste, some improvements on the contaminated soil just telling what it's for. Also for like clean wood and trees for city residents that are not charged, just to be more specific on that. And then items, and then outgoing material for purchase, they put that in there so that people would know. Street repairs, they divvied that out instead of putting all the costs and everything per 4 inches, square inches and everything, so now it's per square foot. Same with concrete. They did add direct injection patcher, and the patching materials are actual cost plus 20% or $160 per hour. Also adding for outgoing materials, they added that brand new road oil for actual costs, salt, and then the brine rates, they just condensed that down so that it's friendlier. The last one is utility billing, and it's the water usage rate. And with Southwest Water Authority increasing their rates 11 cents per 1,000 gallons, that is also raised in our rates of 11 cents, so it went to $6.91 per 1,000 gallons. And that would be all of the changes that are for the fee schedule, and staff recommend that the resolution be passed for the 22 fee schedule.
Thank you, Mrs. Carlson. This is Resolution 34-2021. Commissioners, do you have any questions on the fee schedule? There are no questions.
Move to approve.
I'd look for a motion. Thank you, Mr. Oderman. Commissioner Oderman moves to approve 34-2021. Commissioner Frederick seconds. Any further discussion or questions? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Oderman?
Aye.
Mr. Frederick?
Aye.
Ms. Walla?
Aye.
Mrs. Sobeluk?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Next item up is our future fund, and this is ordinance 1734, second reading, final passage. And this again will be presented by Deputy City Administrator Carlson.
Thank you, President Decker and Commissioners. Before you is the markup of the ordinance 1734 left there, so if there was any suggestions or changes. And I have not received, or staff has not received, any changes since presented on the first reading. So staff recommends the final passage of ordinance 1734.
Thank you, Mrs. Carlson. Any questions for Mrs. Carlson on 1734? Hearing no questions, I'd look for a motion.
Move to approve.
We have a motion to approve by Commissioner Oderman.
Second.
Although,
Jason can have it, that's fine.
all right. Commissioner Frederick with a second. Any further discussion or questions? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and vote. Mr. Oderman?
Aye.
Mr. Frederick?
Aye.
Ms. Walla?
Aye.
Mrs. Sobeluk?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Next item up is the monthly financial report. And that'll be handled by Accountant Maury.
Thank you, President Decker and Commissioners. So starting off with our treasurer's report, as of November 30th, 2021, store net working cash, we're down a little bit from last month. We're down to 66.2 million. That assigned and restricted cash line, just for the public, so anything that's restricted, that would be like our SRF money, the dollars that we're required to set aside for that. Assigned money would be like our oil impact fund, since it's assigned for a specific purpose, which leaves us with our total unassigned cash at 10.6 million. And what that number there, that is basically, that's our general fund business continuity amount. So basically what that means is the Government Finance Officers Association, they want us to have 3 to 6 months in that cash balance if we would have some type of disaster and we need to get through the general fund. With our general fund budget being 20 million, obviously we're at about 50% right there. Century Code says we can't go above 75%. And we should be down based on our budget. I believe the next time we do our year-end financial report, we should be closer to 7.5 million, which is right where we budgeted that we wanted to be. So that's where that 10.6 million comes from. And then moving on to our investments, I know we talk about this every financial report, but you're not going to see a lot of changes here from the prior month. Most of our contributions are made at the beginning of the year. Only things you'll see here is some of our pension contributions, small changes in interest, things like that. So we're still right in that $39 million range in our investments. And then moving on to our 1% sales tax. So just wanted to mention for the public, so the collections you're seeing for November are actually earned in September, filed to the state in October, and then we actually receive it in November. So all of our state tax collections are on a 2-month lag. So then you can see from the graph here, that dark brown line, 2021 is a little bit lower than where we've been in 2019 and 2020. The blue line is 2019. So we're down about 152,000 altogether from November of 19 to November of 2021. That's about a 25% decrease. First 11 months total, altogether we're down about 515,000. That's about a 9% decrease for the first 11 months. And then we have this slide here just to show the public again that we collect our sales tax in 2 separate funds. So it should be exactly half of the previous slide. And then in our hospitality tax, so again, the blue line is 2019, the red line is 2020, and then the dark brown line is 2021. In November of 21, you can see we're down a little bit compared to 19, about $27,000, so about a 25% decrease there. First 11 months total in our hospitality tax, we're down about 102,000 altogether. That's about an 11% decrease from the first 11 months of 2019. And then our occupancy tax. So this one's actually the first one where 2021 has been the highest in the last 3 years. So we are about 5,000 higher in November of 21 compared to November of 2019. So about an 8% increase there. First 11 months together, we're down about 70,000 or about 19%.
What's the total that we've collected?
The total that we've collected so far in occupancy. So far in 21, we've collected 296,000.
Thank you.
And then our final state revenue here, our oil impact fund. So you can see we're again trending in the right direction here. We're ahead of where we were on that blue line in 2019. So November of 21, we're really close. We're about 53,000 higher in November of 21 compared to November of 19. So about a 4% increase there. First 11 months total compared to the first 11 months of 2019, we're down about 440,000, which is about a 3.5% decrease. But we are already ahead of where we were in 2020. In 2020, we collected about 11.2 million in oil impact. If we take the average of what we collected so far, we're going to be about 13.3 in 2021. So we're definitely doing better than we were in 2020. And then this slide here, so you can see our budget versus actual summary here. So the first slide on the left, the red, is what we've expended in our general fund. So you can see we're about just under 85% expended at this point in the year. We'll have a lot of year-end transfers being finalized and that sort of thing, so we should be a lot closer to 100% by the end of the next month. And then you can see in our general fund revenue as well, just about 94% collected, so we're pretty close to where we need to be in the general fund revenue as well. Actually, a little bit ahead of that 92% benchmark of where we should be at. And then the final slide here, our enterprise funds. So pretty similar. In the red graph on the left, you can see we're about 85% expended in our enterprise funds. And then on the chart on the right, we've actually collected more than what we budgeted for all of 2021 at this point. So definitely did well in our enterprise fund revenue.
Mr. Maury, that must have been a really hard pie chart to build there.
Yeah, very, very difficult. So with that, I'll do my best to answer any questions, and city staff recommends approval.
Thank you, Mr. Maury. Any questions? Not, I'd look for a motion on the monthly financial report.
I'll move to approve.
We have a motion to approve by Commissioner Walla,
Second.
second by
Second.
Commissioner Oderman. Any further discussion? Questions on the monthly financial? Hearing none, we'll vote. Ms. Walla?
Aye.
Mr. Oderman?
Aye.
Mr. Frederick?
Aye.
Mrs. Sobeluk?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next item up is the IT Director job description, and that will be handled by City Administrator Winningham.
Mr. President and Commissioners, the job description that you have before you is a previously approved budgeted position. This is now the job description. We talked about earlier in the year that sometimes these will be out of sequence as we build our budget. We shouldn't have that too many times occur with the way we'll do our budget process next year. If you look in this job description, there's not a substantial change in what the current IT manager does. What it will do is elevate the position in an organizational concept, directors above managers. So this becomes the Information Technology Director. It seemed to be the best fit for the way we currently have our organization structured. Directors can have managers under them. One of the key differences in this position is that this director will be responsible for coordinating city information across all departments. So that will become an executive position. He'll be able to, he or she will be able to have all this rolled up into one job description. And there's one unique aspect in our Chapter 29 for our municipal code. It goes a long way to talk about, for civil service, to talk about classifications. We still have to do some work on that and change the language to get that correct. When we talk about classifications, it's not necessarily how we're structured now with the way that we approved our wage study. So we have grades and steps. So we have some work to do on the language. But in there's some things that, if it's a new position and if it impacts the budget, then it should become before this body to get approved. It doesn't explicitly say that in the code, but I think that's the best approach, that we bring new position job descriptions to the commission for approval for your awareness. Unless that there's conversations about doing something differently. There are some administrative changes that can be made that I don't think require the commission to approve, and those would be small or minor administrative changes that don't affect the classification or the grade, and that don't affect the nature of the job. If I'm not changing the title, management title or classification, I think that those are just administrative changes. An example of that is in this job description, it says that the relationship as far as leadership and supervisory responsibilities, it says reports to the deputy city administrator. That job position will actually report to the city administrator, not the deputy, but those are small things that would happen in a normal organization. So I just wanted the commission to be aware of that. If those changes, those are organizational, internal supervisory roles. Those are rating schemes that we may change periodically. But I think if it's a new job, then I'll bring those before the commission. And then I'll hold my comments from there.
Thank you, Mr. Winningham. Any questions for Mr. Winningham on the IT Director job description?
Just, have we developed the process on how we grade these now?
Commissioner Frederick, these are not graded. We went to a wage compensation study where we compare wages with other organizations, and that's how we determine where they fit into the pay scale.
Okay.
So that'll be removed in the descriptions from now on, because we still
Yes.
have grades on the descriptions.
There's grades, there's not classes,
Okay.
and there's no scoring.
We attempted to keep the language somewhat consistent with classification. We didn't change that in the job description, but really the only classification we now have is the grade plate. And so if we were going to change somebody's grade, then we would come before this body to discuss it and talk about what would be sufficient. Since we only have 24 grades in total in the city, we would have to bring that forward and discuss why we would want a higher grade. We'll keep that in the municipal code when we go before the Civil Service Commission, and you'll see that as an ordinance change in the coming year.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? Not, I'd look for a motion on this for approval or disapproval of job description for the IT director.
Mr. President, I move to approve.
We have a motion to approve by Commissioner Frederick,
I'll second that.
second by Commissioner Soboluk. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Frederick,
Aye.
Mrs. Soboluk,
Aye.
Ms. Walla,
Aye.
Mr. Oderman.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Next item up is we have a resolution for the, let me read this out in entirety here. A resolution addressing temporary employment policies due to COVID-19 pandemic related to the FFCRA, which is the Families First Corona Response Act. Mr. Winningham?
Mr. President, Commissioners, what we intended to do is bring this back forward for next year to be in place. Essentially, this would be the 80 hours that the employee would be granted if they do come down with positive for COVID. And this is no change from what we did the previous 2 years. I think based on other organizations that we have to contend with, I think we're in good stead when we keep this in place. We can talk about the numbers a little bit, but we have, it's been minimally used, and I certainly don't think it's been used insufficiently. I know that we've had approximately 35,000, that's a rough number, that we've spent on that particular 80 hours over the course of a year. So it's pretty minimal to have this contingency in place for the benefit or health of our employees to keep our city operating appropriately.
Thank you, Mr. Winningham. Any questions for Mr. Winningham or staff on Resolution 35-2021?
Just one. Under A, paid leave entitlements, up to 2 weeks, 80 hours, or a fire suppression, or part-time employees 2 week equivalent.
We might have, obviously, we have a typo. It's taken from the exact 1
I
Good catch.
didn't understand it, so I'm not sure what it meant, so.
That's a good one. I'm going to read it again to make sure that there's no 80 hours required for fire suppression. That has been in here for 2 years, so I don't want to harm any fire suppression people. I don't think it's a person. I think it was a typo. We'll review that. If we strike that out, it doesn't substantively change the resolution, but that will more than likely be stricken out.
Sounds good.
I'd move to approve with those changes.
We have a motion to approve by Commissioner Oderman, second by Commissioner Walla. Any further discussion? Questions, comments? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Oderman,
Aye.
Ms. Walla,
Aye.
Mr. Frederick,
Aye.
Mrs. Soboluk.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Our next discussion is the American Rescue Fund Act funding review. And this will be presented by Mr. Winningham.
Mr. President, Commissioners, this is a slightly bit of a redundancy, but it's a summary I don't want to call it learning objectives, but I'll just go through these slides very, very quickly. This was more for the agenda for your reading prior to the meeting and for the public just to view all the contingencies that we have to sort of abide by with the American Rescue Plan Act. There was two additional documents that were part of that. One was the 152-page federal guidance that becomes the public law for the American Rescue Plan Act. Additionally, there was a summary, bonus slides that you can read that give you an awareness of what, when we go down the road of talking about the American Rescue Plan Act, you just have some fundamental background in the discussion. We did bring this up last meeting. We talked quite a bit about, in summary, of what the American Rescue Plan Act is. I'm just going to go through these. I'm all the way on the background slide, so if you can advance that for me, and I'll just speak on it. Overview of what the American Rescue Plan Act is and what what the federal government intends to do to pass that act. It really provided funding or relief funding. The fund breakdown, it's essentially $1.9 trillion relief package that went across the country just to speed us up to where we're at here as a city. We will receive 2 bursts of money. We received one already, and it's going to be a total of $3.6 million that will be considered American Rescue Plan Act dollars. We received our first tranche of that, which is $1.8 million, and we project to receive another $1.8 million sometime in September of next year. But it will be, we can't say we guarantee that money is going to be here, but we do want to ensure that we take a conservative approach if that money were not to show up, just based on the federal government changing the guidance. There has been guidance that have changed. They call it an interim final rule of Treasury, and I'm going to keep going. Allowable uses for that money. We talked about it last meeting. Essentially, support to public health expenditures, address negative economic impacts caused by public health emergency. The third one was replace lost public sector revenue. We had some discussion about that. The staff did some work on what that base year revenue calculation. There's a math problem up on the board here. I won't do it publicly, but basically I had the finance people do the math, and we essentially think that we are well within our the window to have lost revenue. And I put that in green, so we'll cover that in a following slide. The fourth allowable use was provide premium pay for essential workers, and there's a number of factors that go into that on what could be done for the workers. And then finally, invest in water, sewer, and broadband. And then I have a slide here that talks about non-eligible items. And there's an extensive part of the legislation that just talks about offset tax use and how we have to manage that. And specifically, we can't reduce what we consider revenue taxes within the city. So anything we collect as a revenue tax or a revenue through taxation, we wouldn't be able to exchange that, use that fund for that. And that could be property tax, that could be other taxes that we deem as revenue. And so we're going to go a long way and make sure that we're covered as a city. So we're not, we don't have anything imposed on us if we were to use those funds outside of the law. The slide here, it's a little bit of an eye chart, but it's the oil impact revenue slide. This really takes us to where we had a lost revenue. So oil impact from the state as a transfer, that is considered revenue to the city, and that is also accountable for us to do the calculations. If you look at the bottom of the slide, I'll just cut to the chase to the right. Over the last 3 years, we have had a lost revenue based on the calculations of $6.1 million. So that's well above the $3.6 million that they gave us for American Rescue Plan. So essentially that will be easily accountable. What we intend to do is create a special revenue fund. It will be the Economic Relief Special Revenue Fund, or ERSF. That Economic Relief Special Revenue Fund will be a placeholder for the $3.6 million. For the possible uses, taking the guidance from the commission from last meeting, we looked at what possible uses would look like, and we just essentially took a swing at what we think that those could be. One option could be an offset for a fee. The difference is that we can offset fees, not taxes. And there's a lot of discussion about the difference between taxes and fees. I won't get into it too much here, but we could take a portion of that fund and repay to the citizens city fee revenues that we took in 2020 or 2021. I did some rough order magnitude of that with the staff. We could effectively give back a $642,000 we've already collected as a fee, but that would go back to those items that were a number of different permits and fees that we see. A large portion of that is the alcohol liquor licenses of about $125,000. The second part with that was the 2021 fees. It roughly calculated or tabulated to about $517,000 that we could give back. That would be about $1.1 million. That would leave us, once we receive that second burst of money, of about $2.4 million. You can see that on the board there. We could then offer a moratorium for 2022 where we wouldn't collect any fees. We'd essentially say we would still account for the fee, but we wouldn't actually take the money from a citizen, and that would be budgeted against our 2022 budget. And that would be roughly $650,000 is what we think we would budget as a moratorium. The last part would be we could potentially take some of that money up to $400,000, which would be considered that contingency fee that we had in our contract for the town square, which would relieve the burden from the city, and that's also acceptable or authorized use for those funding, since town square is considered an open space for the betterment of the community. That would give us about 1.39 million remaining for 2022, and so another possible use would then be the premium pay. We've talked about this back and forth. I just gave the same definitions of what that would be. It essentially gives, instead of doing a cost of living allowance, there's been a number of companies and government organizations that have been tracking with the federal Social Security, which was about 5.9% increase. Other agencies have gone as high as 6.2 as far as the cost of living. I do know that some local organizations are trying to keep pace with that. I think that we didn't offer a cost of living right now, as far as, because we'll have to do that cost every year. So we thought a one-time pay to employees would be the most sufficient for our budget.
Mr. Winningham, can we freeze right there? It's 5 o'clock.
Okay.
We have some gentlemen waiting to be
Swearing in.
yes, the swearing-in ceremony.
Just when we were getting to the exciting stuff about dollars and math. Chief Dossinger.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. President, members of the commission. At this time, I'd like to welcome the two newest Dickinson police officers to the community and the commission, Officer Jesse Kubik and Officer Stephen Knapp. Step forward, please. Officer Jesse Kubik is a graduate of Trinity High School and later earned a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from the University of North Texas. Jesse went on to graduate from the South Dakota Basic Law Enforcement Academy in Pierce, South Dakota, as a licensed peace officer. He, along with his wife, recently relocated to Dickinson from Rapid City, South Dakota, where he was a deputy sheriff with the Pennington County Sheriff's Office. He has since completed the required 2-week North Dakota criminal and traffic law study at the North Dakota Law Enforcement Academy and is currently a North Dakota licensed peace officer. Officer Stephen Knapp is originally from Spokane Valley, Washington, where he graduated high school. He continued his education at Spokane Community College, where he earned an Associate of Arts degree. Stephen relocated to Dickinson 3 years ago, where he was employed as a field supervisor with a local oil company. Stephen will be attending the upcoming North Dakota Law Enforcement Academy class starting next month. At this time, I'd like to ask City Administrator Mr. Winningham to come down and swear Officer Kubik and Officer Knapp in. Thank you.
Okay. We'll do both of these at the same time, if you're ready for that. If you'll both raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name. Do solemnly swear that I will uphold the laws of the City of Dickinson, the laws and Constitution of the State of North Dakota, and the laws and Constitution of the United States of America, and I will faithfully discharge the duties of a City of Dickinson police officer to the best of my ability. So help me God. Congratulations. Awesome. There's a Chief Company that says, I don't want to get this wrong. I've already signed these. If you would sign those and, I guess, give copies to the chief to let him know you're officially sworn in. Congratulations.
You'd like to step to the podium? Commissioner, a little bit about yourself and the community.
Yes, as Chief Dossier stated, my name is Jesse Kubik. Originally from Dickinson, grew up in Manning, North Dakota. Population about the size of your family. Went to Trinity High School, where down the road eventually met my wife, Jillian Kubik, over here, where she went to Trinity as well. After that, ended up moving down to Dallas, Texas. Lived there for about 6 years or so. After that, decided to kind of get closer to family. Had an opportunity in South Dakota. Originally was hired on by the South Dakota Highway Patrol. Went through the academy there, and then ended up transferring over to Sheriff's Office due to family, because that's always what's most important, especially in this line of work. After about 2 years with the Sheriff's Office, I ended up moving here, be closer to family, because that's where we're from. And I was blessed to get on with this department, and I'm really looking forward to getting to know the community more, as well as you folks, hopefully on a good state. But yeah, I'm glad to be here, so thank you.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
I'm Stephen Knapp. I moved here almost 4 years ago now, chasing the oil field money, and it was nice, but a lot of time was taken up by it, so I decided to switch careers, start to go for what I've been wanting to do for a long time. And I really enjoyed the community here. I've really grown to love this place, and I'm very thankful to be able to have the opportunity to serve this community and be with all you guys.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, we will move into our next time public hearing or public comment, and that is we have a 505 presentation from the Homeless Coalition. And to lead us into this discussion will be Commissioner Oderman.
So in my other life as manager of mission at the hospital, I work pretty closely with this group, Southwest Homeless Coalition. And I want to introduce Wendy Moffett. She's the homeless case manager for Badlands Human Service Center here in Dickinson. One of the reasons why I wanted to invite the Homeless Coalition to present tonight was I think this is something that these ladies and gentlemen do such a great job of working with this population on a daily basis, daily, weekly, monthly basis, that we're not necessarily aware of what Dickinson's facing in terms of this population, and I think it's really important for us as commissioners to know. So, Wendy, if you want to take it away, I think you have a pretty good presentation here to give us.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'd like to start by pointing out one of my favorite Gandhi quotes: "The wealth of a society can be measured by how well they take care of their most vulnerable." And I believe that to be true. I believe that we see vulnerability in every facet of our society, but most especially with the homeless. Homelessness in and of itself is just a vulnerable, very vulnerable situation. I know that all of our social service agencies here in Dickinson work very closely together to try to address homelessness and find solutions for it. I'd like to, on the next slide here, talk a little bit about the problem of homelessness and the linkage to trauma. Many homeless families that are headed by single women have a history of trauma. They're also very vulnerable to violence, re-victimization, and traumatization. They experience discrimination and marginalization and isolation as well. They experience PTSD, depression, and substance use higher than the national average. A history of trauma is essentially something that many in society live with. And it presents itself in many facets on a scale of very mild to very severe. But being homeless in and of itself can affect each and every one of us. Our goal as service providers is to minimize and reduce the amount of time that a family or individual is spent being homeless, to also help with minimizing some of that trauma. And we do this by using Housing First programs and employment assistance, targeted rental and housing subsidies, as well as mental health case management and substance abuse case management. The current situation here in Dickinson, I've been here for a year now in my position as the homeless case manager, and I've worked with many homeless people and families. I've seen people have to resort to definitely non-ideal situations due to their homelessness. There's not a day that goes by that I don't receive a phone call from someone reaching out, needing some assistance because they've been faced by some adverse life event, such as eviction, death in the family, loss of income for one reason or another. And what we found is that many sleep in their vehicles. You don't always see this, obviously, but if you know where to look and where they go, they're definitely out there. Incarceration is also another means for some homeless individuals to get sheltered. Some turn to ER visits and hospital stays, or they end up having to be sent elsewhere to be sheltered while they wait for their housing funding to go through, which sometimes takes months. We have several great programs that we work with, like North Dakota Rent Help and many other programs, North Dakota Emergency Solutions grants. But all of these take time, and it's not something that someone that's facing imminent homelessness or is already homeless has to spare. Time is definitely not something that they have. They're looking for an immediate resolution or roof over their head so that they can address some of these issues. Next slide, please. On this slide here, the statistical data reflected in this slide is actually a little lower than what we came up with final tally. It shows 105 homeless individuals year to date. However, I believe that's a little higher now. From what we tallied, I think it's around 177.
May I ask what Region 8 encompasses?
Region 8 encompasses all of the surrounding areas, such as Belfield, Hettinger, Bowman, yes.
So how far north do we go, to Kildare?
Yes.
Watford City?
No.
Okay. How far east do we go?
That's a good question. Thank you, Chantel Richardson.
So basically the southwest corner of the state?
Yes.
Okay.
And these numbers, we believe, are a lot lower than they actually are. These tallies, we work with other agencies. The numbers here are a total of all the agencies that collect data for homelessness. And again, I believe it's around 177 total is what we came up with for adults. And the children was around 43, I believe, year to date. So we believe a lot of homeless individuals are still unaccounted for because many of them are doubled up in the homes of relatives, friends, or wherever they can find a warm place to stay. The point in time count that's referenced right below that is an annual survey of homeless individuals in the U.S. that's conducted by local agencies in conjunction with the Continuum of Care on behalf of HUD. And on on the coldest night of January in 2021, our count reflected that we had 6 individuals unsheltered and 22 sheltered. These here are the agencies that address homelessness and are also all members of the Southwest Homeless Coalition. I'm not going to go through each and every one of these, but this is here for your reference. So for barriers to housing, I would say all of these are very relevant, but really the biggest ones that I encounter daily are the issue of lack of necessary documentation and identification that's necessary for housing. Anyone that's ever lost a Social Security card knows that, well, obviously we don't have a walk-in Social Security Administration here in Dickinson, so it takes time to either order it online or send in a written application, and typically that time is around 2 weeks. Most homeless individuals that I've worked with usually will have some, but not all of their documentation. So this is an additional issue that puts them in a bad position while waiting for housing to go through, because all of these documents are needed whenever applying for any type of HUD housing. Obviously, some other issues that are barriers to housing are, excuse me, I'm sorry, I should have brought some water with me. Criminal past. If you have a criminal past that's recent, this is an obvious barrier to housing, and and it's because, well, it really depends on how far back it is and what it is. If it's something real recent, chances, depending on, how severe it is, that is typically what they look at. How long ago did it happen? If it's been over a year and it was a minimal offense, sometimes they're able to get those applications processed and still approved through compliance with a lot of the local apartments that we work with, but that's not always the case. Oh my gosh, thank you. That was so needed. Yes.
What kind of availability does HUD have right now for housing? I mean, are there openings, or is there a big long waiting list, or?
There are openings. And the openings is not the issue. It's just, again, the time that it takes to process the application in and of itself. Even if they have all of their documents, it usually takes about a week for the background check to come back, and then an additional week for it to go through compliance. And then they're given a move-in date. So usually about 2 weeks, and that's if they have everything, and that's a good turnaround time.
So how many units are available through HUD?
I would have to check with some members of our audience, possibly. We have, I know that Pioneer Peaceful Haven probably has 15 right now, and Pleasant Valley as well, the last I checked, had some available apartments as well. And then we also have Metro Plains, and as of right now, they also have availability, and they have several apartments under them that work with income. So it's not the issue of the housing as much as it is the time that it takes to process them for housing, and the fact that they come, a lot of times are not in a position to pay for an extended stay at a hotel until they can be housed. I recently have worked with several clients that ultimately had to go to shelter in Bismarck because, and I'm still working with them on housing, they want to live in Dickinson. Sometimes it's seniors that are on a limited income, and they go to a hotel and they don't realize how, the whole process involved in getting into housing and how long it takes, and that they have to have these documents to do so. And unfortunately, that's a huge barrier.
Another question, what happens if they don't qualify for HUD housing?
If they don't qualify for HUD housing, the only other options that we have are typically to, if they have income, because obviously lack of income is another barrier, and if they do not have income, then that does not leave a lot of options. We're faced with, well, how can we get, are you able to work, or are we looking at Social Security, applying for Social Security disability, or things like that? How can we get you gainfully employed? I'm sorry. So in those cases, whenever they do have some form of income, there's always an alternative as a rule, because there are landlords here in Dickinson and the surrounding area that will rent to someone with a criminal past, but they look at those on a case-by-case basis. So it's not, it's definitely not, a criminal past is not an absolute deal breaker when it comes to getting housing, but it is very difficult. It is a very difficult barrier to work through. So it's something that just takes time to try to we have to be really creative to look through and try to evaluate how, each and every different case as it is, and see what we can do to advocate for these individuals. So an emergency shelter would obviously provide a temporary safe place for people to go while working towards these, through these barriers, to ultimately getting them housed and helping them to become more productive members of our community. I can say I've had a lot of success stories, had people that have come here from other states and been able to get them into housing pretty quickly, and figure out ways to work around maybe getting them some housing through like a local motel. Been able to work effectively with a lot of motels here in town to get some pretty good rates, but once again, they are very strict on their protocol as well, and they do require an ID on both parties. I recently had, just in the past week, a family of two-parent family with a child that was 1.5 years of age, and one of the parents had ID, the other one did not, and because of that, the hotel refused to allow them to stay at their hotel. So, and that's unfortunate because I wouldn't have made that decision, but that's not for me. That's not my decision to make. So but they've managed to be resilient and work through it with a little help. So, but again, that's a barrier nonetheless. This also, with a shelter, I think it's important to mention that if we did have people in shelter that are, obviously along with that trauma of being homelessness, it can sometimes lead to being off your medication, people that suffer with mental health issues. Obviously, if you're homeless, the last thing that you're going to think about is, well, did I take my meds today? Your most immediate physiological need is shelter, a roof over your head. So that's going to be your first priority. And I believe that that in utilizing a trauma-informed, client-centered approach is the most successful. And if we did have those services available by having a shelter, it would allow us as community providers to be able to get them connected with those resources that they so desperately need to get back to being productive members of society. Short-term benefits. So I think that if we did have a shelter, we do spend a lot of time. We've had to bus people out of the area, so we spend the money for bus fare here in our community and out of our local funding to bus homeless individuals to other areas that have shelters, and then work with them from afar, and then ultimately that money is spent once again putting them on a bus and bringing them back to Dickinson because this is where they want to live and thrive. So that's something I believe we would be able to reallocate resources and time spent more effectively among agencies if we were able to get a shelter here. Additionally, I feel like it would stimulate our local economy by helping people become, once again, more productive members of the community. It would also help to reduce the trauma, family trauma that's sometimes caused by being homeless, mental illness, and substance abuse associated with homelessness. Possibly reduce recidivism and the potential for crime due to desperation and the need to survive, and provide a short-term solution resulting in quicker and more stable resolution of homelessness. I don't know if I've gone over here or not. I think I probably have. So I was only going to give one example if you had time for that. If not, we can move on to the next slide.
You can give us an example.
Okay. So the example that I decided that I wanted to share was actually not one of these on the screen here. It was an individual before many years ago. I worked as an employment placement specialist, and that's one of the biggest places that we see a lot of homeless people go because obviously the need for generating some quick cash is something that many of them are thoughtful of because they know that's going to be the only way they're going to pay for a motel for the night or try to figure something out. So myself working at an employment agency, I had a female come into the agency looking for work. She was very well dressed, had an outstanding resume, and she dropped her resume off, and I thanked her. She came back the very next day, checking the status of her application, and then she pulled me aside and she said, "Wendy, I'm homeless." And she said, "I'm sleeping in my car." I never in a million years would have dreamed that this very well-dressed woman was homeless, but she was. And I just, that situation always resonated with me. It did have a successful outcome. I was able to get her resume sent and get her an interview, and she got a position and was able to get housing, and that actually turned out very well. And in most cases that I've worked with, I believe, I've had really good results working with people that were homeless, and I think that this is the biggest obstacle that we face is just not having a place for people to go in the interim until the barriers that they're facing in their life are worked through. Next slide, please. So for strategic next steps, this is still kind of, these are just some things that we as a homeless coalition have been throwing around. But I think that we're all in agreement that short-term, getting something short-term worked out to possibly get us through these next cold winter months would be wonderful for this vulnerable population that we're working with. And we know that Oasis Motel has rooms available and works well with all of the coalition members to provide short to midterm housing. We might, if something like that were successful, we might possibly consider longer term if depending on the situation, securing funding to provide a space to fulfill immediate housing needs. Because once again, it sometimes takes, on a good, with a good situation, we might be able to get someone housed in a month, but you're usually looking at least a minimum of a couple, a month or two, if there are not multiple barriers. And in some cases there are multiple barriers. Many of them have mental illness, many of them have substance abuse issues. And if they have family members and children, these things are also things that they need to address to be able to become more able to meet the needs of their family. Now, as far as the situation with a longer term shelter and a solution, we have considered that a 2-site solution would be best, only because we have a lot of individuals who are homeless, and then we also have families that are homeless, and we would want to enable the sheltering of the families and youth separate from those individuals served. We would want to finalize a business plan developing a housing first focus, and possibly look at multiple, other sites here that are available in Dickinson that could be repurposed. Next slide. And these are just my reference for some of the data that was shown there. Thank you for your time. Any questions?
Wendy, do you have, is there federal funding in all these bills being passed? Is there ability for these organizations to reach out and get grants or some type of federal funding to assist with shelters like this that you have in mind?
I am not aware of any funding of that sort. The funding that I am familiar with is simply funding that assists homeless with the financial side of it, like North Dakota Rent Help and emergency solutions grants and things like that will help people to get current on utility bills, pay first month's deposit and rent. I'm not aware of any that offer funding for something like a shelter. I would imagine that a 501c nonprofit might be able to do something like that, but we haven't found the means or the right person to do that.
So, Mr. President.
Mr. Overman.
So there are a couple grants out there, but most of the time they are for established shelters. They are for shelters that have been established and are in working order. I actually just had somebody reach out to me last week and identify a grant that would help actually pay for renovation up to like $40,000 a unit, depending on how you score on the grant and things like that. And that is a federal grant, but they are out there, but they're typically for shelters that are up and running. Yeah. But, Wendy, I wanted to thank you. You did a great job of presenting the information. One thing that I kind of wanted to provide some additional color on is just the need for that immediate housing element. And we have situations at the hospital when we have a patient that is being discharged. They need HUD housing, but they're in that 2 to 4 week time frame where they qualify for the housing, but they either don't have the documentation, the application that needs to be processed, and they're not appropriate for them to stay at the hospital anymore. But there are times where they stay at the hospital for longer than is probably appropriate because of the fact that there's no place for them to land. There's no landing site for them. And so a shelter locally that had a housing first approach that, you know, would provide a landing site to where that they could stay and have a roof over their head until that application is processed is a definite need. I mean, we have case managers at the hospital that they spend days trying to find placement for people. And every single one of these, you know, ladies and gentlemen that work in this, they do the same thing. They spend 8, 10, 12 hours working on one case to try to get somebody a roof over their head or a bed to sleep in. And I think that was something that really spoke to me in the presentation, was the reallocates resources and time spent more effectively. If we weren't spending so much time trying to find a place for these people to land, we could actually spend the time on case management and trying to get them the resources to serve their behavioral health, their employment needs, all those different things that, you know, once we meet those Maslow's hierarchy of needs, once we meet those primary needs for people, it's a lot easier for them to get back on their feet.
Mr. President, Wendy, I've got a couple questions. Give me an example of how many units, you talk about a two-site solution. Give me an example of how many units you would need in each of those sites to satisfy, I mean, your minimum need even.
The minimum need?
Yeah.
I think we originally talked about 10, maybe 12.
Of each?
Mhm. Well, no, total.
Total, so like 6 of each, roughly.
Mhm.
And then what, another question is, you know, you talk about temporary or transitional. I mean, what if they exhaust all their options and there's nowhere for them to go? I mean, how long can they stay here? So does it turn into permanent housing is where I'm kind of going. I mean, what happens?
Well, I've worked in domestic violence before and with a shelter. And in those cases, I think that obviously we would have to have a plan for length of stay, because the reality is those cases, they are out there. Thankfully, they're few and far between, but you sometimes do come upon those types of cases. I think the only thing in those cases would be to look at trying to arrange some type of permanent supportive housing, because in most of those cases, it's you're dealing with other issues, such as possibly physical disabilities, mental health issues, and we now, through United Way is our access point here in Dickinson for an assessment tool that we've just started using here in Dickinson, and it's called the VI SPDAT. It's a housing assessment tool that we use to help assist with prioritizing homeless situations. It's not something that is a quick turnaround, though. It's mainly in cases where people have faced chronic homelessness for many years, and it's certainly not the first choice that our North Dakota Continuum of Care wants us to go with. It essentially is kind of like one of those situations where if you've exhausted all other efforts, then maybe this is something you want to do it in conjunction with your efforts, just to make sure you're not leaving any stone unturned.
My last question is, what do you see our role as? What are you asking tonight?
For the possibility of funding for some type of trial run at a shelter where we could get just at least some rooms or some roofs over homeless, individuals, help them get shelter, and see, how effectively we could do something like this in our community. I believe that our community agencies are absolutely phenomenal at what they do, which is probably one of the reasons why many have often said, are there even homeless people here? But there are. But again, to reiterate that, funding for us to just get, a business owner that's willing to work with us and provide some rooms. And I think the Oasis Motel has certainly given us the indication that they're interested in a potential, offer of some kind if we're willing to work with them. I don't know where we are on that at this point, but I think that, that's still, on the table.
So what's it going to take, as a number-wise, to get us through the next 6 months of winter? I mean, through the end of April, let's say.
Now, that's a question I wasn't prepared for.
Well, you know we're going to ask.
Chantel, would you have like a ballpark on that?
Please come up to the front.
Yeah, come up so we can get you on camera.
Okay. Chantel from Dakota Center for Independent Living. We figured if there were 10 rooms at $500 a month, and then for a pilot program, looking at even 6 to 12 months, about 100,000. And those would be rooms that would be housing first, like Wendy talked about, where people just go in. Because right now, our agencies are patching things together. We are pulling money from Salvation Army when we can, from some of the youth funds that my program has, some of the stuff that, I don't know, Path. I mean, so we're doing it right now, but we're stealing from like all the other organizations. And so then we have other people that are in need, then we don't have that money available. And case management wise, we're already doing all the case management, different agencies, so.
And my question would be beyond the money. You say you have the Oasis. You have on your slide here other locations. My concern with the Oasis is it is butted up against an apartment complex.
So simply put, the Oasis, out of all the motels and hotels in this town, was the only one willing to work with the Homeless Coalition 10 years ago when we became a 501c3 who takes our insurance. There's no other motels or hotels that are willing to take our insurance. And we do have insurance for the Homeless Coalition, so that's how we ended up with Shell. Shell is willing to take that, willing to work with us. There's a community room there. It's centrally located. I mean, we've had homeless families and people in there for years. It's just the numbers are growing again, so.
But the security is addressed within, because of there's an adjacent location there.
Well, it's a motel, so if I go stay at the microtel and I have someone else that checks in next to me that's actively using and prostituting.
No, I'm talking about an actual apartment complex that is attached to the Oasis.
I guess I don't understand your question, because we don't use that part at all.
So there's, they can't commingle between the Oasis and the, okay, there's no access points between the two.
Except outside.
Oh, are the
Yeah,
buildings?
they're basically.
There's not a doorway that goes from
Yeah,
one
there's
to the
basically
other.
two
I
separate
haven't
buildings
been in
that
either
are.
facility,
Okay.
so,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay. No, the Oasis is its own structure.
Okay. It looks like,
Well, I think originally it was planned to have access, but I don't
Right,
think it ever,
okay.
that ever happened.
Yeah, no, they are not connected. I mean,
They're
no.
connected, but they're not. Yeah.
Correct.
okay.
So, okay, let's, sure.
I just wanted to add one more thing. I'm Susan Josephson, and I work at Pioneer Peaceful Haven.
Yes.
And one of the other.
Susan, come to the mic, please,
Oh,
so everybody
sorry.
can hear you.
If I could just add, one of the other advantages of the situation in Dickinson is that some of the housing here that's permanent housing, you can stay 20 years at Pioneer Peaceful Haven. And you can stay there with support because in addition to offering housing, we have a service coordinator, which happens to be me, but that offers support for the residents who live there in terms of if they are receiving benefits, how do we help keep them to continue to receive those benefits? If they need to get work, how do we prepare them for work and help them continue to be able to keep those jobs? And so some of the long-term housing here has support like that, so that we're not having people turn back around and end up in the same homelessness situation. And we're not the only people that offer that. So one of the other things about this request is that we're well positioned here with the work that Dakota Center for Independent Living does and some of the other housing situations, is that we're already helping people stay in housing once they get in the housing. So the investment is not just, let's give people a temporary solution so they're not freezing. This community is particularly well situated to have people stay permanently housed, so that we're not continuing to just recycle the same folks in a temporary shelter. And I've lived in a lot of different places, in Florida in addition to here, and that's an unusual situation. Dickinson has a strong advantage in that way, in that once people are housed stably, they can stay housed stably. And that is not true in a lot of other communities. So there's a true advantage here, where by supporting this transition, you're making a long-term commitment that actually works here, where other communities don't always have that advantage. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other further comments? Yes, sir.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Tony Norton. So I've been a resident here at Dickinson now about 7 months. When I came through here, I was homeless. I've benefited enormously from Badlands Human Services and all their resources. When I showed up here, I had 2 pairs of clothes. That's it. No wallet, no ID, nothing like that. Within 4 months' time, I had a wallet in my pocket with a driver's license, social security card, birth certificate, solid housing, employment. It was just the start that was rough. I was just wandering. I was just headed east, right? I had nowhere to stay, so I would sleep on the side of the road or under bridges. Apparently that's not socially acceptable, so I would end up in jail, right? Anywho, a shelter would have been a nice option, I'm looking at all the resources that you have here in Dickinson. It's insane. I've been homeless in several states, California, Oregon, Washington, Hawaii. I've never seen anything like this before. Completely changed my life around within 4 months' time. I thought to myself, wow, if they had a shelter, like, they would have every need met here in Dickinson if they had a shelter. I don't know, I just felt the need tonight to come here and just put in my 2 cents. I have firsthand experience of being homeless, living homeless here in Dickinson. I know what it's like. So I feel like it's my turn to give back. So I just wanted to put a face and a voice on that. So,
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Jessica Oderman. I'm the Regional Director at Badlands Human Service Center, and I don't have a lot to say because I think these ladies that are boots on the ground doing the work did a great job, including Wendy. But I just want to speak a little bit in terms of what I'm seeing financially as a director of a facility. And so we have a very small pot of money called wraparound funds that we have in our biennium budget as a state entity, and that is it. That is all we have for emergency funds. And this year alone, we're on track to deplete those funds before the end of the first year of our biennium. And so just to put that in perspective, these ladies are being really creative, and when they say they're making a quilt of funds to try to wrap around people, that's absolutely true. Just in the last 2 weeks, I've had about 6 requests. So I'm facing questions like, do I approve a bus ticket for this person? Or the $24 we need to get this person a social security card or a birth certificate? This person needs a housing application, they need maybe their first month's rent. So those are just some examples of, in terms of what's needed, all of those upfront, those different things that are needed in order to get someone ready to go. And then, of course, our agency also is serving individuals who may have persistent mental illness, long-term chronic mental illness, and so there are medications that they need to be on. And so then we're facing issues like, okay, well, if we can get them some housing, then we can get them a job so they can pay for their medication. And we don't want to have to drag that out, because in order to get someone stabilized and in a place where they can be successful in a shelter and be successful in an apartment and get a job, in some cases, we really need to work on getting them stable. And again, it's that social determinant of health, right? And so that's the term that we use in science. It's called a social determinant of health, but it's housing, food, employment, transportation, which is a whole nother beast in and of itself for our community. But I just want to illustrate that because, you know, the example that John gave about the hospital, sometimes we're calling the ER like, hang on to them for a few more hours, we're working on it, we're trying to get them a place, and then you have entities who have conflict or friction purely because they care so deeply about getting people shelter. And if we could get the immediate shelter in place, we could work so much more collaboratively as a community to get all those other needs met. And they truly are spending hours and hours and hours just trying to problem solve rather than getting those other needs met. And so again, I could provide some literature or some research specifically on what a housing first model could do financially in terms of getting dollars back to the community. It is an investment. I attended some training specifically, and some models that have done it successfully are getting $2 to $3 million back in their budgets simply because people are housed and employed. And so it's meeting that basic need in order to get people back. And those are savings in criminal justice, court costs, not just dollars back, but savings in general. So I could provide that literature via email if you're interested. I don't know if that's comparing a large city compared to Dickinson, but it's just maybe something that might be of interest. And with that, that's all I wanted to say, is I just wanted to support them and give my 2 cents. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I think the one thing that we can, since they did give us somewhat of a figure, we could look at doing, and we'd have to look under some of this money we have from the federal government. And since they do want to use it as a pilot program, maybe we look at something that we can revisit maybe in May and give some short-term funding to get just through the winter time.
Yeah.
I think that'll come with the next discussion as we finish up with your presentation, Mr. Winningham. And I don't know, some commissioners might have ideas too for that, you know.
I'd like to see maybe some sort of committee put together with maybe a couple commissioners, some staff, and some of these folks to talk about their long-term plans. So when budget comes next year, this is something we're going to look at, we're prepared. So
it could be something that we have in our grant program, added to our grant program down the road.
And the Homeless Coalition has worked on a like a draft business plan of a temporary supportive housing shelter. So some of that work's been done, but yeah, I would support that work of a subcommittee get together and working on something.
For the immediate need, though, I think next month when we hash out what we're going to do with the money from the federal government, maybe there's a small chunk we could assist to get them through, at least through May.
I agree.
Yeah, agreed.
So, Mr. President and Commissioners, I'll make a couple of comments. The federal government had this is for the public to really understand. It's money that they've taken from us and our children's children, right? It's trillions of dollars. So, for the public that's listening, this is in the last 1.9 trillion the federal government put in legislation. $30 billion was put into HUD to stem some type of homelessness through grants. But they're not just going to give it to people. You have to be somebody who is pressing HUD and pressing those federal agencies to spend those dollars right here in Dickinson. And then an additional $5 billion was given by the federal government as essentially to stem homelessness, all going to HUD. And so there's not anybody that I know of in our city government right now that's, actively trying to pull all that money here. But we're going to attempt to do it. We're going to attempt to try to find that money right back into our community. And so
that's why I asked the question about the Fed programs. And I know the state dumped a ton of money into human health and services too.
This last burst of money that went to the state of North Dakota, they put $25 million into health and human services. I don't know if that's going to help much, but it was mainly geared towards behavioral health. But for us in the city of Dickinson, we have a small, it's budget dust essentially to the federal government, to our future, that says, hey, you can have the $3.6 million. It's a tiny fraction of money. And so we could be somewhat smart to offer some immediate need. One of those things that is allowed in legislation is for disparate and those that are immediate need in your community. So those that are homeless, that is one way to do it. And so, Mr. President, we can offer a few ideas. We have to do some staff work to say what would be some grant possibility, because we can't, as a city, can't become a health and human services. So you also can't overstep what our authority would be. But we may be able to offer, because we don't have social workers, we may be able to offer something that allows for an application, or we use a pass-through, and maybe the Homeless Coalition becomes our pass-through, and we put a portion of money, X amount of dollars, that is for the emergency immediate need, and I think that can be offered at our next meeting or in talks before that, particularly if it's a necessity through the holidays and through the winter.
Okay. I think the next item up after the presentation by the Homeless Coalition is for public comments, not on the agenda. So we are way past that time, but we will hit it right away. So if you have any public comments that were not on the agenda this evening, please come to the mic and present them to the commission. Anything that we're not covering in the agenda this evening is welcome. And if you're watching at home, you may call in to 701-456-7006. So anyone that has any
currently empty.
Comments?
You will hear silence or music on hold when connected.
Any public comments on items not on the agenda? Anyone with any public comments? Seeing no one has any public comments not on the agenda, I'll close that segment. And we will move back to your discussion, Mr. Winningham, on the government funds, the American Rescue Act.
Okay, so I thought was on a roll, but I think I was ending with possible uses. If you click through the slide, there's 2 slides left. That slide is effectively talked about premium pay for essential workers. The city of Dickinson, as a lean city, when I say lean, we don't have a lot of overages in our employment. If you look at other cities with the size of population that we have and the amount of services we have, we are probably 30% lower as employment as far as employees on the books. So we do a lot of substantial work for the city of Dickinson with a lot less people. It might not look that much like that in the city hall, where you have staff workers and administrative workers, although incredibly important. It's the unseen work that's being done. We are effectively down 4 positions in our street maintenance. Those are critical needs, especially in the winter. And so there's a lot of options right now for employers. And what we're seeing is that if we don't take care of our employees now, or at least try to give them the benefit of being an essential worker, especially for a city government, we're going to lose them. We're going to have people that, there's many options. It's a good problem to have in the city of Dickinson, to be able to find employment, to be able to have low unemployment, to be able to go and find jobs. City governments cannot keep pace with the private sector. It's always been the case. We try to get the environment right. And so one of those small ways is to just put back with some, what the federal government allowed us to do is for premium pay. Mr. President, you mentioned last meeting about just cutting out maybe a portion of that for the hourly employees. I think any bit of what I now am seeing as a retention help for those employees, I think will go a long way as we are going to discuss this during our budget year next year. I just think that the inflationary costs are just outpacing any government's ability to adapt. Governments typically are annual budget basis, and we can't come back try to figure this revenue out on a month-to-month basis. Private sector, they can take some risk. They can get those payroll protection loans. They can get loans from other organizations that we can't take advantage of, and they can offer, $20, $25 an hour for an employee. And that's one of the things we have continued to wrestle with as a staff, and we're seeing that in our retention numbers. It'll be something we'll talk about in the coming months, Mr. President, and things that I think we'll have to offer as some kind of retention incentive. I'm not there yet as far as the staff work. I know it was done in the past when there was an oil boom, but we're faced with some really incredible challenges when it comes to our inflationary costs. When any employee, not just city government employee, but any employee within the city of Dickinson is faced with the long supply chains, the increasing inflationary costs of goods and services that we have to, as a population that's slightly isolated from the rest of the country. And most of the time that's in a good way. And so I would like to see that with some of the funding with the American Rescue Plan. And then the last slide really is a timeline. I don't think we're in jeopardy to rush. I think I think the commission can adapt with these funds. Any given time, whether it's a special meeting or another meeting, if you wanted to use some of these funds immediately to meet the needs of the community, I think you could. But we have time to sort this money out completely. As you can see, there's some timelines there. We think we'll get some distribution for the second burst next year, but the funds don't have to necessarily be committed. And that word committed means by 2024. If it's a service that goes over the period of performance, it can go all the way out to 2026 if it's a project. And with that, I'll hold for any questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Winningham. I guess what I would, as I suggested last meeting, for commissioners to bring some ideas forward on the American Rescue Act funding. So,
I have a question.
Mr. Frederick has a question.
It says funds cannot be used to offset tax, but I've done some reading since our last meeting. And one of the frequently asked questions on the National League of Cities is, can cities decrease taxes after receiving these funds? The final rule that would prohibit tax decreases is a restriction only on states. The local government section of the bill contains no prohibition on lowering taxes. I mean, your statement here, we're not the state or we're not a territory, so that's in the interim final rule.
Yeah, it's a risk. I mean, I don't disagree with it. I just think it's a risk for tax reduction. Essentially, what the federal government will attempt to do is one for one. If you read the interim rule, is if they think that during our Single Audit Act that we are offsetting tax, for example, property tax, we will have to show where we reduced another budget item. So if we reduce another budget item in our city budget, then I think we would probably be clean to do that as far as a Single Audit Act for the federal government, but we will be audited by the federal government. So regardless of what the state or League of Cities say, we will have a federal audit that will say, what did you do to reduce your budget in order for you to reduce taxes? And so we'd have to figure that out, but I think there's ways to do it. I'm just not sure how we do it with just sending back, based on the federal law, that we are just going to reduce taxes. And that's just something we'll have to wrestle with the law.
The funds are also used as allowed to hire an administrator to get this stuff cleared up before we go through it too. So
we could use the ARPA funds to hire another person just to,
that's an expert in this.
I would use that term loosely, but if we could find somebody that would come and.
Can actually pay somebody.
Yeah. Larger cities will do that. Larger cities that are getting 50, 60, 70 to $100 million, I would see that would make the case, but I'm not sure what we're trying to accomplish.
And then we're not allowed to do it. I'm just trying to.
Again, I guess I would open it to the commissioners if they have thought this over for the last 2 weeks and have any ideas.
Mr. President, the group that I presented would be one of my ideas in regards to shelter. But I also, I know a couple months ago I was a little bit not in support of premium pay for employees, but experiencing what we've experienced at the hospital, and I think what other employers in town have experienced, I've evolved on that, and I am supportive of a premium payment to our essential workers, because it is a retention effort that we could make that I think would be successful in most cases, and I think that it's important for us to do what we can to maintain the skill level that we have at the city right now, because hiring new people, you don't know what you're going to get. We have staff that we know and trust right now, and that has valuable experience, and if we can do something in terms of that premium pay to increase our chances of retaining our current staff, I think that's an important expenditure that we could make, that these funds qualify for.
You have a range you are thinking, Mr. Oderman?
I mean, I think what's illustrated here in this document would be option B or C. I would be comfortable with either of those.
Okay.
And are we setting parameters on this? I mean, like time on the job, or?
We looked at a few ways to do that, because you can go all the way back to 2020. I'm not sure if it would make sense to harm our current employees by using a cutoff date, but that could be something we would consider. Maybe we go, if you worked,
Can we do
9 months out of the
prorated?
year, if you work 9 months out of the year in 2021, I'm not sure where the cutoff for the impact is. Like, were we worse off in 2020 during that time? Maybe, because there was a lot of double work being done because of the unknowns. So if you worked in a 6-month period during 2020, you'd be eligible to receive that. That may be one criteria.
If we take 2020 and just prorate it, let's just say instead of 2,500, you do 2,400, and you prorate it by month worked. It's basically $200 a month.
Yeah, and I know at the hospital, and we don't have to do it like we did at the hospital, but that's just my experience, is we based it off of hours worked.
I would agree to that.
Up to full-time hours.
And I'm with Mr. Oderman. I've come around on that. It's part of the stuff that I wrote down is in my notes here is premium pay, being part of the money, uses of this money, but I just think we need to made my opinion clear that I want to find something that's going to benefit all the people of Dickinson, or a majority of them, not just reduce our costs that we've already incurred.
Ms. Sobolek, do you have any comments?
I do. Thank you for asking. I am in support of premium pay for our city employees also. I do like tying it to, 2020 if possible, of those hours worked or other things. And as for other topics, I apologize, I misunderstood your request last time. I thought we were going to discuss that at our retreat coming up in like the next couple months. So I do not have any other topics for ARPA funding at this point in time.
Okay. And that is something that we can take. We have time to get what we want to address this at the retreat. So I guess what I would say going forward, the only thing that I can see that might be an immediate need, that if we do want to tie it to a special a meeting maybe at the beginning of January, is if the commission would like to meet to discuss that pilot program for helping with the shelter.
I would agree to that.
We could probably do that right after the 1st and get them some immediate money to help with that.
I mean, is anybody opposed with us approving 25,000 to get them through till we get a chance to sit down and talk about this?
Oh, I'm not.
No.
I'm not.
I'd
Mr. Stovall?
second that motion if you want to make it.
I mean, I think let's get them something, and then, like I said, I'd still like to see a subcommittee with maybe a couple commissioners and some staff and some of their members sit down and try to work through some of these details. I mean, with the holidays and stuff, I don't want it to wait another 2 or 3 weeks. So if they have a desperate need right now.
So that'll cover, let's say, what time period from
Well, I thought
presently
she said 6 months to a year was 100,000. So,
Right.
But I mean, so I'm going to say it's 10,000 a month, maybe. So I don't know, maybe not that much. Maybe it's 5,000 or 6,000 a month, but it should get us at least till the end of January, probably.
through the retreat, at least. Our retreat is scheduled for when?
We're looking probably mid to end of March.
Oh, okay.
So I mean, you're well within, and we have contingency budget money. It's not as if we're stuck with just ARPA funding, but we have the funding available if you want to do something that would allow us to, much like a grant, it would be nothing more than what we're sitting here as a normal grant meeting, what we would have. I think might need a little help from Deputy City Administrator about how that works.
Well, I was going to say, too, set up the accountability that maybe that's reimbursable, they turn it in. I guess I'll leave that to the finance people, how you want to account for the money, but it seems like we sort of have a motion to provide some emergency funding right now with a second for 25,000 to the homeless coalition to at least get them for the next couple of months.
I mean, yeah, if it's as simple as turning in receipts for room rent or whatever.
Right. Well, like I said, I'll leave that up to them to.
We would ask that point of contact to meet with me and develop that simple process to where for the accountability, and then we could sort that out. That's not overburden.
I guess the other thing that it seems to be there's a consensus on providing premium pay. I would say the amount is a whole different animal of if we're going to stick with what is suggested or.
That was more in the C range, but.
We do the C range, and what if there is, upcoming costs? You don't know what the future's going to bring, and that way you have a little bit left behind.
Okay. Because we could do that too.
Still provides.
We have a motion now for this immediate funding for the homeless, and if we would approve tonight, Linda, say C premium pay, how soon would that get to the employees?
As soon as you would want that.
I mean,
we can process it within this week or next week. Next week is a payroll week, so no, not next week.
I'd rather have them get the money before this tax year is over.
I would agree with that.
I concur. So that's why I'm kind of pushing that too with the premium pay. It seems like C might be where we go. Mrs. Sobluck?
Are we, but the parameters really haven't been worked out, or are we just gonna?
What do you mean by parameters?
Well, I mean, what if you've worked here a month?
That's why I suggested prorating it.
Yeah, prorate, yeah,
I mean,
well,
for
you know,
21 or 22?
20,
Or,
for 20.
that's a good question, Commissioner Friedrich, and, you know, I guess I wouldn't have a problem with us saying, if you worked here before a certain date, you qualify for this. And what date do we want to set that as?
If we simplified the math and made it item B, then we just go back the period of 24 months from this date. And that would give you 2 consecutive years of pandemic. And so that would essentially be $100 prorated if you hadn't worked long enough.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, I can say this because it doesn't include me, so I'm not part of the discussion. I can fight for the money, but essentially say 24 months in the preceding to this month. If they've worked here those 24 months, then they'd potentially be eligible for all of the, it says 2,500, but you could say it 2,400. And that way, if they've been here for 24 months, they're going to get potentially the full amount minus taxes. That's, if they've been here 6 months, they're only going to get 6 months of that.
I mean, in private business, that's how a bonus would work.
Yeah.
If there's a bonus plan, I mean, they would prorate it, they wouldn't pay you that
Right.
full bonus
Yeah.
if you've only been here for half a year
Yeah.
or something.
We could do that over the 24-month period, make it $2,400
Yeah,
over the
that's-
2-year
but I
period,
mean-
prorate it to the monthly.
But I mean, I was gonna say, well, do you even need to go back to 20 though then?
They just go,
I mean, could you just go 21 and prorate it for 21? I mean, if you worked here in 20, you could probably, you know, I mean, you're still here, so.
okay, so the amount is.
I'm just trying to make it simple. I'm with you.
I agree.
I mean, it would be basically everybody that's working here in 21 prorated. I mean,
For the amount of 2,400, so $200
the
a
end of
month.
21 is in 2 weeks, so
Yeah.
I would imagine unless somebody quits in the next 2 weeks or we fire somebody, that they're gonna work here the whole year, so.
Yeah,
Well, there is somebody there that, if you resigned effective today, you're not getting this.
You're gonna get a week later, yeah.
I won't
Well, I
name
mean,
names, but no.
Yeah, I would make that motion to approve,
The 2,400.
2,400 and 1,200.
we should vote on the first one though.
Yeah, we'll go, so we'll wait on your motion. We'll go on the homeless. We have a motion from Commissioner Frederick to provide $25,000 in emergency funding for the Homeless Coalition. A second by Commissioner Oderman. Any further discussion? Not, we'll go ahead and vote. Mr. Frederick?
Aye.
Mr. Oderman?
Aye.
Ms. Walla?
Aye.
Mrs. Sobeluk?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Next item up, we have providing premium pay of $2,400 full-time employees, $1,200 to part-time employees. Prorated for the period of time worked in 2021. And that motion has been made by Commissioner Oderman. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Commissioner Frederick. Effective date, this is further discussion. Effective date, when do we want to make it? I would like to, my suggestion would be as soon as Mrs. Carlson can.
Agreed.
Can we get it on payroll this year yet?
Yes.
Can you get it out this year? Can it be a separate payment?
Yes, it would. Yes, it would be a separate payment
Okay.
because it's not considered in the payroll. It has to be a federal tax on that. I believe that we can do this within a day or so.
Okay.
I'm thinking that we could get it done, at least by Monday.
By
We
Monday,
could-
okay.
Because payroll week starts on Tuesday next
Okay,
week,
as soon as possible then, before the end of this
fiscal year.
This fiscal year, so. Okay, so we have, any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and vote. Mr. Oderman?
Aye.
Mr. Frederick?
Aye.
Ms. Walla?
Aye.
Mrs. Sobeluk?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. We will bring our other ideas forward. I will continue this discussion for the remaining funds into next year, continue to bring ideas. If something pops up, I think there's some good options. One that was presented tonight, an idea on the town square, rounding off some of those costs. A benefit for everyone.
City benefit?
Right, a city benefit. There can be some other ideas like that also. And so I think keep that fresh in your mind as we go into the next year, and we continue to evolve on some of these. I think some of the questions too on taxes will flush themselves out as we move along. I think discussing some of the returning some of the fees should still apply, because I think that would benefit a large majority of people.
Mr. President,
small refund.
The idea is sound. Having gone through multiple single audit acts, if I can get OMB North Dakota to, they were the pass-through for the funds, so some of that may be feasible if we can get the auditor to clear that we can do property tax. Okay. Part of it is a safe harbor act. Part of it is you can't use federal dollars to pay local property tax. But if we can get them to acknowledge that we're not a state or territory, such as suggested by Commissioner Frederick, I think that would also be a win. We could consider that in our
a portion of them anyway.
A portion of it, so that we could do a broad base amount of money that gives back. I think what you will have is flexibility based on our ability to cover lost revenue. It was a significant drop when you saw 13 to 11 million. They gave us some math to do, having 4.1% increase. That's a 6.1 revenue loss, and so the city felt that. You budgeted that way. You considered reducing certain items on the 2020 to 2021 budget. So I think that we could do that because the city has done well not increasing taxes.
Yeah, and my suggestion was not to actually write refund checks. It would be more to, in 23 and 24, reduce our transfer amount and reduce our mills. So instead of transferring 5 million, let's say it's $1 million. We only set our mills at 4 million that year and use $1 million of these funds to cover the offset.
We could do that without that discussion because of the way that we are covered because of revenue relief. Because since we had lost revenue, that special revenue fund is only city driven. Like it's not ARPA money anymore. We've essentially washed it into, but it's separate. We've covered it.
And that was my thought, just taking whatever it is, 500,000 for 23 and 500,000 for 24, or $1 million and $1 million, whatever that number we agreed, and just reducing that mill transfer.
We will tee that up in March. We'll do some more staff work to make sure that we have the right answer for that. And then, Mr. President, I did have, as we're talking about multiple things, one of the things that came up was the opioid settlement. That it not on the agenda item, but since we're having a discussion here, I don't know if it needs to be a vote, but it just has to be acknowledged that we are.
Oh, this is for the condemnation.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
I don't know if we need to be a vote, but we just need to have an awareness that there was an opioid settlement, and I wanted the city attorney to be able to speak of that, and it seemed like it made sense within this ARPA funding.
Okay.
Mr. President, Commissioners, just to make you all aware, we spent quite a few moments this evening talking about funding for mental health and homelessness and addiction and things of that nature. So I just want to make you all aware that currently the state of North Dakota is engaged in a lawsuit that's been pending for about 3 years now regarding 2 prominent pharmaceutical companies. And right now, currently what we're being told through the AG's office is that there's $26 billion nationwide that's going to be allocated as part of this funding. Right now, North Dakota's potential total amount of funding is $45.5 million. And right now, the state of North Dakota through the AG's office is asking political subdivisions with populations of 10,000 or more to sign on to these settlements based on that to hopefully get additional funding for their particular areas. There's some discussion that the state legislature may step in and allocate some of those funds or direct where some of those funds go. But for the most part, in visiting with City Administrator Winningham, the city either signs on to those agreements, or we find ourselves in a position where we have to litigate the cases ourselves, which was not prudent in this situation. So just to let you know that we have communicated with the AG's office that we do want to be part of that settlement. Hopefully we get some of those settlement funds here in this region so we can deal with that and deal with some of the issues in our community. So just want to make sure you're aware of that. I don't know what, if any, funds will be received by the city or what, dollar value that may be, but we're hoping that that funds come back to the city so that you all can address that and see what we can do with those monies.
Okay. Thank you for that update. All right, if there's no other further discussion on the American Rescue Fund Act, we will move into reports. First one up is our monthly HR report. Mrs. Nominick.
Thank you, President Decker and Commissioners. First on the list is the Animal Control Officer. We did have an opening there, and that position has been filled. My understanding is since this report was sent to you all, we have also made an offer for our 22 position for animal control. So we are in the process of that, filling that one for 22 as well. Communications specialist, we have 2 openings right now, and we did make 1 hire. We had an internal position for the detective sergeant position, and Corporal Travis Lines has been promoted to the sergeant, detective sergeant position, which then opened up his position of corporal. So that is being advertised for an internal position there. We have 3 positions for police officer open right now, and had three hires for that, and then we have the 4 positions for 22 that we're working on trying to fill. And then the firefighters, we had 3 openings for 22. We have filled all 3 of them, and we'll be having a start date of January 22 for those. Property appraiser technician, we had 1 opening. It's been kind of a long process for us. Had an offer out there, and that person, it didn't work out with her, so we made another offer, and that's been accepted, and we're working on the background check right now. Street maintenance operator, we have, as of today, we now have 4 openings in streets. So we just got a resignation today, so did an interview this morning, and we have 1 more interview to schedule, but we have more positions than we're getting applicants, so that's been a tough one to fill. We attempted to hire a seasonal snowplow operator for someone who maybe works a summer job and they get laid off in the winter and have a CDL and maybe have some experience plowing snow. In the years past, we were lucky enough to fill 1 of those positions, but have not had much luck in the last couple years and had really no applicants that were qualified for that. So we'll continue looking for that if anyone has any interest in that. Utilities manager, we did have that position open and did not have any luck there. Our thoughts are to reopen the position after the holidays and have it open until filled type position and interview as we get the applicants. As you know, it's a pretty, kind of unique specialty position. It's going to take the right person. Fossil preparator for the museum, we did fill that position. Background has been completed and offer letter has been signed. Museum educator, an offer letter just went out this week, so looks like we will have that position filled soon as well. And then part-time visitor service attendant is just a weekend position to help out in the gift shop, and they did some interviews today for that. So that is all I have. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Any questions for Mrs. Nominick? Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next item up, we have a report from Deputy City Administrator Carlson. This is the 2022 budget memo.
Thank you, President Decker and Commissioners. In preparing our new budget book for 22, we'd like to put in a memo that states where we're going and what some of the new budget items are. I'm not going to read the 6 pages, but I am going to highlight
Really?
just a couple of the things that for the public. The city is fortunate to have a city commission that remains committed to the goals established for our long-term success. And some of the things that highlight are mill levy, as it was spoken before here in conversation. We have not raised our mill levy in dollars. When we ask for the tax levy from the city to the county, we ask by the dollars. And since 2017, we've kept those dollars at $5,724,000. So our mills go up and down, but it's due to the total dollars that we're asking for. And then under budget, our general fund was balanced at $22,451,331. That is an increase over 21 of 8.19%. Our overall budget, including capital and enterprise and everything, our budget was raised by 4.85% from $75.6 million to $79.3 million. Some of the reasons why the budget has gone up, there's about 4 different things, but conversion of our new wage and compensation study and benefit package, increase in the cost of operational, building repairs and equipment expenses, our sales tax expenditures for quality of life projects, and then our oil impact funding for CIP projects, annual maintenance, and highway reconstruction. So with that, then we go into the employee benefits, and the 22 budget approved was prepared incorporating the market-based wage study and a new revised health credit benefit. The new wage scale incorporates a 2% increase between steps, and then with that, the personnel staff requests approved in 22 were in engineering, a new GIS technician, in fire, 3 new firefighters, in police, 4 new patrol officers, and then in IT is a promotional from IT manager to a direct information director, which was presented tonight, and then in animal control, a new animal control officer position. The city still continues to participate with the state health medical plan, and the state did pass a health insurance increase of less than 1% for our employees. The city did change employee benefits for dental, vision, and life insurance, and this provided the employees with more options and savings in their premiums. So that was a benefit to the employees. In our pension plans, we stayed the same. We're still with the state. We still have the option of the closed defined contribution, and we're still at the same percentage rate of 7%. Sales tax and investment worksheet. The sales tax and investment worksheet discloses a 5-year outlook. It's a forecast of revenues and expected or upcoming expenditures. The revenues, if everybody knows me, the revenues are very much on the conservative side, and where the expenditures are figured on the higher end. On that, some of those sales tax expenditures, a community betterment project approved for 22 out of our sales tax revenue was our town square for $2 million, and then the expenditures of our DDA executive director for $58,000. Also, the commission has approved using our development impact fund. This fund had a cash reserve consisting of payments through our special assessments. And for the year of 22, the commission has approved using $5 million of that money for a career technical education academy of $2 million, sports complex subsidy of $1.5 million, and our mausoleum expansion of $1.5 million. With our CIP projects, the city has looked over many and discussed many different projects and dedicated funding sources. And with the 22 budget, we're approximately going to be using $6.83 million in money to fund those projects for our CIP. Those are capital projects. One of the other things that was mentioned here was the debt summary. A long-standing goal of the commissioner is to reduce the city's debt. So I put in there, the city's debt summary has been decreasing throughout the past 5 years since I've been here. With, starting in 18, our debt was 87.1 million, and today in 22 is estimated to be 68.2 million. So we've done a great job in reducing, and that a lot of that is taking advantage of low interest rates and then using some of our cash to buy our equipment and sustaining in some of our projects. So with that, I would like to thank the opportunity with all the department staff and city commissioners to help me provide a good 22 budget to go forward. Thank you. That's my report.
Thanks, Linda.
Thank you, Mrs. Carlson. Any comments? Again, thank you. We'll move into public safety. We have a report this evening from the police department. Chief Dossinger.
Thank you, President Decker. At this time, I'd like to provide a synopsis of the monthly activity for the Dickinson Police Department for the month of November. Looks like I'm... There you go. Thank you. For the month of November, we responded to 2,162 calls for service. As you can see, compared to our calls for service is slightly down from the last couple of months. Our top November calls for service were parking complaints with 98. We responded to 74 welfare checks. That was tied with the speak with an officer. We did respond to 58 suspicious persons or vehicle calls. We also responded to 55 domestic violence calls and sex offender status checks. The most cited traffic violation for the month of November was speeding with 19, followed by driving without insurance and failure to register a motor vehicle. There were also 12 citations issued for care required and 8 citations issued for no valid driver's license. There were a total of 67 total accidents in our community for the month of November. 5 of those were injury-related, 16 of those were hit and runs, and 46 of those were property accidents. There were a total of 435 traffic stops conducted. 241 of those were issued warnings, and 111 citations issued. Warrants led the month for criminal arrest, followed by 24 drug-related arrests and 15 DUI arrests. We had a fairly busy month related to behavioral health calls. There was a total of 96. There were 74 welfare checks conducted, 10 mental health specific calls, 4 intoxicated subjects, and 8 suicidal related threats that officers responded to in the month of November. 25 of our officers went through firearms training in the month of November. All of our patrol officers went through tourniquet training through the Berkshire Training Center. 15 of our officers attended the child abduction response team, CART training, and 8 of our officers participated in our crisis negotiation virtual conference. Our criminal investigative unit took on 68 new cases. 6 of those involved digital forensics, 7 agency assists. They conducted 5 background checks, 2 search warrants, 1 theft and fraud investigation, and 2 of those were speak with an officer. They had 1 child abuse and neglect call that they were called out for, 1 drug information smell, 1 embezzlement, and they conducted 43 sex offender status checks in the month of November. Right now, they have 56 open cases that they came into the month of December with. They were called out 3 times. 1 was for an unintended death, 1 burglary-related call, and 1 aggravated assault. Our school resource officers stayed fairly busy in the month of November. They responded to 14 calls in the middle schools, 12 in the high school, and 7 in the elementary school. They also conducted several presentations at the high school setting. They provided presentations on civil rights, careers in law enforcement, police response to medical emergencies, and also did a presentation on vaping. At the middle school, they did 7 presentations. 2 were on internet safety and sexting, and 5 presentations on how the Bill of Rights applies to policing and history-related classes at the school. They also did presentations at the elementary level on harassment and provide an Alice update at the Heart River School. Our records department conducted 32 sets of fingerprints. There are 24 sex offender updates, 1 new sex offender registration, and conducted 43 background checks were processed in reference to liquor license renewals. Our dispatch center, outbound calls, 1,113 calls. They also fielded 4,536 non-emergency calls and received 876 911 calls for the month of November. Our animal shelter responded to, or animal control officers responded to 124 calls for service. 20 of those were barking dogs, 4 animal bites, 4 related animal calls, 3 animal neglect calls, 69 animal at large calls, 4 last animals, and there were 10 animals that were surrendered to the shelter. There were a total of 40 cats impounded in the month of November and 32 dogs impounded in the month of November. Fairly active shelter. Of the 72 impounded at the shelter, 50 of those were strays, 11 of those were surrenders. 9 of those came from Stark County, and 2 of those were bites that were impounded. Month of November, we're also seeing Veterans Day, and we celebrated all our officers and employees that provided service to our country, to our community. Those include Aaron Bates, Andrew Stidham, Brandon Stockey, Casey Broston, Christian Sanders, Jared Blaine, Jeremy Mosier, Justin Frederick, Tyler Mahoney, LaShawn Pitstock, Michael Knoll, Michael Hansen, and Troy Machowski. I also just kind of wanted to throw in the information regarding our Badlands Crime Stopper and our Operation Holster, which is an effort to combat stolen firearms in southwestern North Dakota, and the information on our text-to-tip for the Badlands Crime Stopper is also listed. I'd be happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you, Chief Dossinger. Any questions for Chief Dossinger? Job well done, guys. Thank you again for the report.
Thank you.
We'll move into planning. Mr. Hadley, we have a rezone request. This is the second reading and final passage of ordinance number 1735. This rezone is from ag to rural residential for 159.87 acres. Mr. Hadley.
Thank you, Mr. President and Commission members. Good evening. This is the second reading, as you said. We have a number of second readings this evening. This particular zone change is for approximately 60 acres that will allow the Broken Axe subdivision to apply for a final plat approval here in the near future. There hasn't been any changes since the first reading, and staff would recommend approval of the second reading of ordinance 1735.
Thank you, Mr. Hadley. Any questions for Mr. Hadley on this rezone?
Mr. President, I move for second and final reading of 1735.
We have a motion to approve the second reading and final passage of 1735 by Commissioner Frederick.
Is it 37? Sorry.
1735.
Oh, sorry.
I'll second.
Second by Commissioner Walla. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Frederick?
Aye.
Ms. Walla?
Aye.
Mrs. Soboluk?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Our next item up is a rezone request from R1 low-density residential to community commercial. And Mr. Hadley?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. This second reading, as you said, on 8th Street Southwest. This particular request takes that property from R1 to community commercial. It's actually bringing it into conformance with our future land use plan. There hasn't been any changes on this request either, or any public comment, and staff would recommend approval of the second reading of 1736.
Thank you, Mr. Hadley. Any questions on 1736 for Mr. Hadley? Hearing none, I'd look for a motion on 1736.
I'll move to approve ordinance 1736.
We have a motion by Commissioner Walla to approve 1736.
Second.
Second. We'll give that one to Commissioner Soboluk. She's
Delayed.
A little bit time delay there, so.
3-second delay over there.
All right. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Ms. Walla?
Aye.
Mrs. Sobeluk?
Aye.
Mr. Frederick?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Our next item up is a plat vacation and de-annexation or exclusion of property which is now within the city. Will go back to Stark County. Mr. Hadley.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. This would be ordinance, second reading of ordinance 1737, and this particular portion of it is a plat vacation of a portion of Pinecrest. The second motion will be the actual exclusion.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hadley. So, any questions for Mr. Hadley on 1737? Hearing none, I'd look for a motion.
Mr. President, I move second reading and final passage of ordinance 1737.
We have a motion by Commissioner Frederick to approve 1737.
I'm giving her a 3 seconds.
She's good.
I'll second.
Second by Commissioner Walla. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Frederick?
Aye.
Ms. Walla?
Aye.
Mrs. Sobeluk?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. You said the second item here, Mr. Hadley, is, would that be
1738, and it would be the exclusion of the same parcel that we
Okay,
just discussed.
Yeah, 1738, and that's the exclusion of the same parcel. Any questions for Mr. Hadley? If there are no questions or comments, I'd look for a motion on 1738.
I'll move to approve.
We have a motion by Commissioner Walla to approve the exclusion in ordinance 1738.
Move to approve. Since nobody's jumping out of it.
We have a second by Commissioner Frederick. Any further discussion or
sorry.
question?
I was being driven. I was reading the next one.
Hearing no discussion, go ahead and vote. Ms. Walla?
Aye.
Mr. Frederick?
Aye.
Mrs. Sobeluk?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Our next item up is ordinance 1739. And this again is a plat vacation and de-annexation for property that is now within the city limits. We'll go back to the county. Mr. Hadley.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. This is the southern portion of the Pinecrest area. It is the second reading, as you said, and there haven't been any changes, and staff would recommend approval of the plat vacation ordinance 1739.
Thank you, Mr. Hadley. Any questions for Mr. Hadley?
Mr. President, I'll move to approve second reading and final passage of 1739.
We have a motion to approve 1739 by Commissioner Frederick.
I'll second.
Second by Commissioner Walla. Any further discussion or questions? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Frederick?
Aye.
Ms. Walla?
Aye.
Mrs. Sobeluk?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Next item up is ordinance 1740, and this will be the exclusion of this property. Mr.
That's
Hadley?
correct, Mr. President. Staff would recommend approval of second reading of 1740.
Thank you, Mr. Hadley. Any questions for Mr. Hadley on this exclusion?
Mr. President, move to approve second reading and final passage of ordinance 1740.
We have a motion to approve 1740 by Commissioner Frederick.
I'll second it.
Second by Commissioner Sobeluk. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Frederick?
Aye.
Mrs. Sobeluk?
Aye.
Ms. Walla?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Our other item up here is for de-annexation, again, of some property, and this is the second reading and final passage of ordinance 1741. Mr. Hadley?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. This is the only one that has one motion, and it's to just exclude the property, and this is formerly known as the Sundance Village property on the east side of town. So staff would recommend approval of ordinance, the second reading of ordinance 1741.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hadley. Any questions for Mr. Hadley on 1741? Hearing no questions, look for a motion.
Mr. President, I move to approve second reading and final passage of 1741.
We have a motion to approve 1741 by Commissioner Frederick.
I'll second.
Second by Commissioner Walla. Any further discussion? Questions? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Frederick?
Aye.
Ms. Walla?
Aye.
Mrs. Sobeluk?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Our next item up, we have the Fisher's Third City East Edition Final Plat. Consideration to approve the resolution. This is a new resolution, right? So this would be 1736? I mean, not, excuse me.
36-2021.
36-2021.
You had the number right.
Yeah. So, Mr. Hadley?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. This resolution 36-2021 is a replat of the Fisher's City East, which is actually create Fisher's Third City East. It includes some vacations of right-of-ways, and what the ultimate goal here is to allow, this was actually heard last week at the Planning Commission. There was no controversy or comments from the public against this, and staff would recommend approval of Resolution 36-2021.
Thank you, Mr. Hadley. Any questions or comments for Mr. Hadley on Resolution 36-2021?
This is the one by Midwest Doors, correct?
I'm sorry, what?
The one by Midwest
Yeah,
Doors?
the map up there.
Yes.
I didn't see it
Yep.
there. Oh, yeah. I'd move to approve.
We have a motion to approve by Commissioner Frederick.
I'll second that.
Second by Commissioner Sobeluk. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Frederick?
Aye.
Mrs. Sobeluk?
Aye.
Ms. Walla?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Our next item up is the final plat for the Acres subdivision. Mr. Hadley?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. This is the continuing discussion on Resolution 33-2021, which approved the Acres Final Plat subdivision in the ETZ. I believe the applicant is in attendance or the representation. Last time we talked about some options of what you may or may not consider. I think they have an option that is probably much more workable for staff. We did receive that today, and I believe you did as well. So it's something that I'd like them to probably come up and explain what they're proposing and go from there.
President, Commissioners, Aaron Grinsteiner, co-owner, Venture Commercial. Thank you again for taking the time to discuss this with us tonight. As we discussed last week, 2 weeks ago, we were going to leave the meeting in an attempt to come to a resolution with the adjacent property owner. Reached out to the property owner multiple times over the past 2 weeks, and we were unable to come to an agreement regarding our non-access line. As Mr. Schrank explained at the last meeting, we explored our other options of how we can achieve the same thing. And I think I maybe just want to elaborate on what our purpose is for our previously proposed non-access line and then what we're proposing tonight. Our goal was not to exclude the adjacent property owner from our subdivision. Our goal was to regulate if he were to replat his property and plat lots based off of our right-of-way, that we could regulate, what went on there. So we were fine with, coming to an agreement if those future lot owners would join our join our homeowners association, abide by our covenants, again, pay for snow removal, pay for maintenance of the primary right-of-way, and then also the adjacent property owners sharing in the infrastructure costs associated with those lots. So I just wanted to clarify that our intention was not to keep that property owner away. It was just to be equitable to our future lot owners and members of the homeowners association that we will create through this subdivision. So as you will see in your packet, I believe I do have paper copies here as well if you need them. The other alternative that we are proposing now is to the right-of-way that abuts the Tormashi Minor subdivision. We want to reduce that to a 79-foot right-of-way, and then take that 1-foot strip of land and attach it to that Lot 1, Block 2 on the corner there, which would essentially accomplish the same thing, right? That would be a privately owned piece of property that could not be passed over using our right-of-way into the Tormashi Minor subdivision. So again, accomplishes the same thing, and I'll let Mr. Schrank add anything.
Yeah, Andrew Schrank with Highlands Engineering. We've been working with this developer on this property. Just to add a couple things, we did reach out to the county, Mr. Alheiser, the road superintendent there, and asked if he was okay with the 79-foot right-of-way. He did not have any concerns with that. And as we said, at that Lot 1, essentially what we're doing is putting a private strip of property in there. It would be sold and conveyed with Lot 1, Block 2. That just disallows that access between these two developments. Essentially, like was noted, it just completes the same task in a different way. So something I want to bring forward for consideration tonight.
Commissioners, any questions? I know we've heard from Mr. Hadley. Swanko, any concerns?
Mr. President, Commissioners, I've had a brief opportunity to visit with some of the staff and get some thoughts. My question for the developer, I believe you said that it would be sold with Lot 1, Block 2. As far as maintenance is concerned, I mean, what's the plan or what's the strategy there to make sure that we don't have some undeveloped strip of acreage that is unsightly or not being properly maintained?
Yeah, so that would fall on the owner of Lot 1, Block 2 to maintain that. And the other thing to consider here is that, so the platted right-of-way is 79 feet, but our actual roadway is only 24 feet. So we'll have a large ditch on the east side of Acres Drive there, which our homeowners association will essentially have to pay to maintain. So it's very likely that 1-foot strip would be taken care of with the rest of that ditch as well.
I think you'd have some assurances too. Your city code already restricts how high grass can grow, how much weeds you can have, all those things. So there's already methods in place with your current city code to enforce and require that that's maintained in the same manner that the rest of the subdivision would be.
Could we just agree that the homeowners association is going to keep that mowed? I don't imagine the owner of Lot 1 is going to want to mow a 200-foot, 1-foot strip.
He's probably going to struggle to find that 1 foot holder.
So, I mean, can we probably make that a possibility? Okay.
Absolutely. Yep.
Commissioner Frederick, staff discussed this previously, and we thought we could just capture that within the development agreement. That way, future owner understands that's the intent. So moving forward, everybody'd be on the same page.
Good deal.
I mean, have you guys, the only other thing, have you discussed, I mean, the Tormash Minor would want to come in, how you would give them access if that ownership needed?
Yeah, so I think it still leaves some options there where that 1-foot strip at some point could get split off and could become a replat that's part of Tormashi Minor Subdivision. If they replat that into 5 lots or something in the future, they could buy that 1 foot, dedicate it back as right-of-way, come to terms with this developer on what that looks like. I think at that point that could be explored.
Any other questions for the development team? Thank you, gentlemen.
Mr. President, just a quick question for formality's sake. The resolution that was passed initially passed based on the prior plat that did not contain that access or that strip of land. So I think what we're going to have to do procedurally is you're going to have to make a motion to vacate that and then redo the new motion with that resolution with that plat.
The commissioner that made that is not here.
Was that Mr. Oderman?
Correct.
I guess what we would do at that point is, if they need to get going with the development.
I guess we need to maybe, we can look it up.
Commissioner Oderman that made the motion to pass the resolution? Correct. Yep. We can certainly do that for purposes, I'm assuming they want to get this going as soon as possible. So we would make a motion to approve that as a new resolution based on this plat map.
All right. Okay. So I guess any other questions for the gentleman? Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Mr. Hadley?
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to bring one point up, and staff did notify the adjacent property owner that's affected by this by certified mail. It hasn't been able to be delivered to date, so just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff or the developers? This would be Resolution 37-2021. This would be the approval of the modified final plat of the Acres subdivision.
Mr. President, move to approve.
Commissioner Frederick motions to approve 37-2021.
I'll second.
Second by Commissioner Walla. Any further discussion? Being none, we'll vote. Mr. Frederick?
Aye.
Ms. Walla?
Aye.
Mrs. Sobeluk?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Our next item up, we have to set a timetable for our condemnation hearings and proceedings. Mr. Winningham, Mrs. Winko, do we have some proposed dates?
Mr. President, there's one more item on this, and I believe that City Attorney Winko has given the language, and I'll just read it, and that will be a vote for this language?
A vote of support to move forward with the condemnation proceedings is what we need pursuant to code.
And I'm going to read that out loud so it's in the public sphere here. In order for the protection of the health, safety, and welfare of our community, we bring forward this evening the listed properties we declared a public nuisance and dangerous structures and move forward for demolition. And then we have some proposed dates for that action.
Okay. I would look for a motion to approve the statement for condemnation.
I'll move to approve.
Motion by Commissioner Walla to approve. Second by Commissioner Frederick. Any further discussion? All in favor state aye.
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 Motion carries. And then the dates, Mr. Winningham?
We were looking at two dates that we think would be sufficient. It's the 18th or 19th of January. The 18th of January would be at 8 a.m. for the hearing, The 19th of January would be 1 PM.
And I would block out an entire afternoon, because we're gonna have 3 separate proceedings, and it's gonna be a mini hearing, so plan for an afternoon.
In Bismarck, so I'm not sure how long I'd be able to stay on the 18th, but I won't be here on the 19th.
Okay. I'm free either day. So it looks like the 18th, because you can't make the 19th. Mrs. Sobeluk?
I'm good either of those days.
Commissioner Frederick?
Yeah, I would have start development.
Yeah.
Yes, I guess.
I'm going to go for the 18th in the morning. 18th in the morning? We'll go for 18th in the morning.
We're ready.
Since we're gonna be here anyway for the meeting, we'll make a day of it.
Make it a day.
I'm sorry I didn't hear which date you picked.
18th, Commissioner Sobeluk. The 18th.
Tuesday, the 18th at 8 a.m.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else on the condemnation proceedings? Mr. Winningham, Mrs. Winko? Nothing?
Nothing further,
Okay.
Mr. President.
All right. Last item up is commissioners. Do you have any items you wish to discuss? Is your time.
Well, I didn't bring this up with that Fisher's Third City East plat, but we did talk about this at planning and zoning. You know, this creates another one of those areas where we've got a road to nowhere that we need to have staff do some work on and decide. Bring those to us so we can decide how we're gonna get some of these finished or what our plans are going forward, so.
Agreed.
Me and Ms. Marshak had a long discussion after planning and zoning, and, I mean, there's a handful of them that, or, I don't know, maybe half a dozen, I don't know, 7 or 8, I don't exactly know for sure, that we gotta figure out how we're gonna pay for them, or how we're gonna ask the people that they provide service to help pay for it, or what our plan's gonna be, so.
I think, Commissioner Frederick, when I reviewed I use the term loosely, but it is our approved plan, our comprehensive plan, there are a number of collectors on there that I think just overcome by events during the years that did not become the top priority. And I'll use Fifth Avenue as an example. That has been on a completed collector route and multiple pages of the comprehensive plan. And going back and reviewing, trying to figure out why that just wasn't completed, it just looks like it's overcome by events. It just wasn't something that was pressed by any staff member or the commission, and so now is the time. And so I think there's going to be a number of those as we talk about what the city's going to do for, whether it's, as we had our developmental workshop, what without a development agreement, how are we going to benefit the community by saying we should share some costs with some of those items that we want to look at. 15th is another example. At what point do we pay for a portion of the boulevard and apron when we know that that's going to benefit a development? Does it make sense to do that? And so we're going to work up a few metrics that then the commission could say, when we consider developments, you should consider these 3 things. It's part of our comprehensive plan, but for some reason, a few of those roads got missed. So we'll work and bring that forward, and I think that'll give you an idea of, we could target some priorities even this year, especially when we get into the spring, and I think we'll be better off as far as collectors.
And I think that's one of the other issues, is the arterials and collectors, right? I mean, what I'm talking about is, we've got, for example, with this Fisher's East side, we'll have, what is it, 21st?
It was 21st.
21st Avenue?
That's correct.
So it's 21st Ave. That'll drive into there. They used to be designed to go all the way through to South Villard, or whatever that.
East Villard.
Or East Villard.
East Villard. So a lot of these that Commissioner Frederick and I have talked about are local roads. And so that is a different discussion than how do we move forward with arterials and collectors.
Yeah. I mean,
And I think this project being an exception, we've done a pretty good job about addressing those as development moves forward, but we have these outliers that we need to work on.
the best example I can always use is the road that's a gravel road going into Dickinson Ready Mix. that's really a street, but it never got paved. What we do with those. I mean, do we?
Fisher's Third's a good example. The business owner doesn't care whether they get hardball surface for fire suppression. They'll give us that. But then, do we really want to do that for the future? Because they could move from that facility someday, just like you see with BJ Services or other things. I think that's just one of the conversations we have to have, and that it would make sense just to, if we can complete it to where we want it as a city, then we try to do that as often as possible.
I think Mr. Zuroff can talk about that little stretch of how much maintenance and repair we've done, because it's very wet there. Yeah, speak up, Gary.
I was going to talk tonight.
Didn't rehearse.
Yeah, I didn't think I would have to talk tonight. I got the on button. That area was looked at quite a bit in different ways, and at some point I think the property owner was going to take care of that by the Dickinson Ready Mix. But yeah, any of these areas that we don't have to maintain would definitely benefit it on our side.
21st is the Midwest Doors Road.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I was back there, yes.
Yeah.
That definitely is one. It was unimproved, it was never improved, and, we did do a lot of maintenance on that one to try to just bring in a base, and we felt that's as far as we should go because it was an undeveloped road at the time. And there is a terrible amount of groundwater there that they've had to remove.
And that's, I guess, something too, staff should maybe prepare a report when we do have our retreat. Maybe discuss those too. So. Okay, anything else? There's nothing else. I look for a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
We are adjourned.